there's any genre that a film lover like me will always have a pure satisfying investment in, it has to be the post-apocalyptic genre. Hell, one of my favorite movies of all time are a part of that genre. From Children of Men to Mad Max Fury Road to the new Planet of the Apes trilogy, and yes, even animated movies like 9 will always hold a personal place in my heart for years to come. I could say the same thing for other underappreciated flicks like The Book of Eli and other dystopian, mankind is screwed sort of films. However, here's the thing. Despite how imaginative and innovating that those films clearly were, there are the other kind of movies that apprehend such a creative and unique concept and mesh it together into a Pangea-sized disappointment, from things like Waterworld, The Postman, and basically anything that has to do with Kevin Costner. But, being a fan of that genre, no matter how bad or good your movie turns out to be, I'm always willing to give that movie a chance, because it's always nice to see someone else who can take that certain property and mesh it into their own version of a post-apocalyptic world. And for this year, it's exactly what we got right here, and it's none other than Mortal Engines. A film that is more or less based off of a series of books created by Philip Reeve and is produced and co-written by none other than the Lord of the Rings mastermind himself, Peter Jackson. But it's not directed by him, which is odd considering most of the advertisement of this movie said, "From the makers of The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit." So instead, this movie is being directed by a first-time director and an uncredited story artist known as Christian Rivers. The basic angle of Mortal Engines is that 1,000 years in the future, mankind is fought in what is known as the 60-minute war, which basically almost eradicates everything in the earth. And the only way for human civilization to thrive is to create towns, cities, or even countries on top of wheels, and having to meet other smaller cities for energy in a philosophy known as municipal Darwinism. Our main character in this movie is Hera Hilmar, who plays Hester Shaw, a young, war-torn, scarred-up, mysterious-looking fugitive whose primary objective is to take bloody, aggressive vengeance on the man who essentially murdered her mother when she was a child. And that man's name is Thaddeus Valentine, played by Hugo Weaving. He too has missions of his own, and one of them he is grasping towards is ruling the world simply by way of using a giant molecular weapon that decimates whatever it shoots or it comes across in the blink of an eye. And so it's up to Hester Shaw to amalgamate with other characters like Robert Sheehan, submitting his role as generic hero number 759, and a bounty hunter, a part of the Anti-Traction League known as Anna Fang, played by Ji Hai. And they have to work together to put down Thaddeus Valentine and eliminate the weapon. So, being a personal fan of the post-apocalyptic genre, what did I personally think about Mortal Engines? Well, for me, I would basically summarize it like this. The good news is we're finally getting another post-apocalyptic movie. The bad news is that it's not a good one. In fact, I would have to say that it's quite massively disappointing. This movie was everything I was afraid Warcraft was gonna be. It has the same embarrassing caliber as something like Waterworld. And I have to feel sorry for every single filmmaker, actor, and writer involved because this movie is going to bomb hard at the box office. Because this movie has a $100 million budget, and over the first weekend, it has made $8 million. However, while this movie is a total superficial disappointment all the way through, it's still not that bad of a movie. In fact, there are certain redeeming aspects that I will defend this movie for. And let me tell you one of them. Let me spill the beans on the obvious parts. This movie is gorgeous. There's not a single bad visual effect in this movie. Everything in this movie in terms of art direction and visual flair is just stunning all the way through. The design of the cities look visually impressive, such as London, which is basically considered a predator city because it eats and consumes more and more smaller cities, which is simply perhaps the best visual effect of the whole movie. And the look of the whole film, particularly the movie's version of the landscape of our post-apocalyptic future, is a very interesting design choice. There are other effects in this movie that has to do with this Anti-Traction League, which basically builds cities in the skies and not on the roads, because that's where most of the power takes place in. Those cities in the sky look relatively neat. It's just a shame that they just feel entirely derivative, acting like Cloud City from The Empire Strikes Back, but we'll get to that in a second. Along with the visual effects and the art direction, the actors also do a very good job. Hera Hilmar does a very good job with the material she's being given as Hester Shaw, even though the material is completely minute, ranging her from acting like Lightning from Final Fantasy XIII. Aside from her moping and brooding, which is basically 90% of the direction that this movie gives to her. When she's not doing that and she's tackling other emotions, she does a fairly good job at it. Hugo Weaving is fairly decent as the bad guy, Robert Sheehan does a decent performance as generic hero number 759, and Ji-Hai has very good charisma as Anna Fang. None of these actors do a particularly bad job in this movie per se. I mean, most of them I would say is quite good, but this leads to one of my biggest problems of the movie. I don't care about any of these characters. If the rapture happened right now and all of the characters died, I would be dancing like the Six Flags guy all the way to heaven to meet Jesus Christ. Because what this movie really fails at is believable character development. It's so poor that the movie has to have characters exchange expository dialogue about who they are, what they are feeling, what their motivations are, what are their backstories, and explaining the plot. Like I said before, Robert Sheehan is in this movie, who plays generic hero number 759, who does nothing more than to spout annoying quips, ask questions just to get expository answers, and to be the quote, love interest, end quote, for Hester Shaw. Which, by the way, is handled completely egregiously, and I'll tell you why. When these two first meet up with each other, they act like they can't stand one another. And then the movie spends most of its time explaining their backstories, and then all of a sudden they're in love with each other? It doesn't feel natural or authentic. It's like the movie is constantly telling you you're supposed to like these characters, rather than having the movie let us like these characters. But that's not even the worst problem of this movie. The worst problem of this whole movie is that it rips off every single movie you can think of. This movie doesn't have an original vein or bone in its body. There are elements of Howl's Moving Castle, there's elements of Mad Max Fury Road when it comes to the opening chase scene, most notably A New Hope in The Empire Strikes Back. No, I'm not even kidding. There is an element in the climax that is taken directly out of The Empire Strikes Back that if you look at it on screen, you're like, really? Now you're not even trying. But most of all, this movie rips off The Terminator. Why The Terminator, you ask? Well, for example, there is a character named Shrike who is voice captured and motion captured by Stephen Lang, who plays a reanimated cybernetic soldier whose main motivation is to kill Hester Shaw because of a broken promise she committed towards him. Now look, I would have enjoyed this movie if at least it embraced its absurdity and embraced the premise that it had, like Mad Max Fury Road for instance, or at least given us something to care about. But the problem with this movie is that it takes itself way too seriously. And whatever scenes there are that tried to provide, you know, some comedy relief to the movie, it felt more like an insult to your intelligence than a comedic moment. Some action scenes do work, like London chasing down that small city, but the other action scenes involving hand-to-hand combat feel like the people who were responsible for the action scenes in the Hunger Games movies go like, hey, I got this one. And it results in a confusing, disjointed mess of a thing. My final complaint about this movie is that the movie just ends. There's barely any resolution or post-roll to what happened to those characters. Seriously, even after the climax, the ending is like, oh, you're just gonna fly off into the sunset without having to help all these people who are practically hungry and homeless, who don't have a location to live in? Really? You're just gonna fly off into the sunset. In conclusion, guys, Mortal Engines is like that one person who doesn't really have a lot of friends, but has such great ambitions and a wide range of imagination for everyone to witness, that when he shows a failed project, it gets embarrassed and utterly humiliated by everybody. You just wanna go over to that person, give him a hug, and say, hey, it's okay. You did your best, and that's all that matters, but you should try a little bit better next time. Mortal Engines is the equivalent of that person. The movie is visually stunning and has great art design, costume design, production design, and even at points, cinematography. And there are some performances in this movie that do a fairly good job. However, the story just rips off everything you can ever think of. The characters are one-dimensional and unnecessary. Some action scenes work, some action scenes don't, and the ending just basically ties itself in a bow way too quickly. Everyone, I hate to do this to you guys, but I have to give Mortal Engines a 1.5 out of 5. Alright guys, so that is my review of Mortal Engines. Comment below, let me know what you thought about the movie. Find me on Facebook, Twitter, Google+. And also, if you would like to see more reviews like this, be sure to subscribe for more. My name is Luke Nukem, and you, my friends, have been blown away.